Just a reminder that our SimCity rounds is available on YouTube for those of you who want to share this with your colleagues that may not have been able to join us today. And we've also been invited to post our YouTube channel on the Simulation Canada website. So another opportunity to share the wonderful work happening right here at the University of Toronto. So welcome to our first SimCity rounds for 2026. We're so fortunate to be able to have the wonderful Elizabeth Horsley here with us. She began her nursing career 35 years ago as an operating room nurse, and then she transitioned into nursing education in 2003 and was subsequently one of the early adopters of simulation in Ontario in 2004-5, when the province funded every program of nursing to establish simulation programs. She earned a Master of Science in Medical Health and in Medical and Healthcare Simulation from Drexel University in 2016, and she has completed the comprehensive debriefing workshop at the Center for Medical Simulation at Harvard and the Master Learning course at Northwestern University, as well as obtaining the CHSE, the Certified Healthcare Simulation Educator designation. Currently, Elizabeth is in a faculty role at the Lawrence Bloomberg Faculty of Nursing at the University of Toronto, and she's working to advance and enhance simulation education across all programs. She's involved with Simulation Canada and has developed and will be facilitating a new course, Keystones to Certification. Elizabeth also works independently, conducting customized simulation professional development workshops for clinical and academic institutions. And today she'll be talking to us about a primer and a refresher on debriefing, such an essential aspect of all our simulations. Thanks for being here today, Elizabeth. Over to you.
Thank, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. I'm excited. I just started here at U of T last October, so it's great to be actually in the simulation community in Toronto. So for today, a couple things. You will see my email address is on the first slide, and also you've put it in the chat. Please, anyone out there, if anyone knows me, you know that I will answer every question, share all the resources. I'm a big fan of finding a lovely, exciting new article. I'm always willing to share my resources, share the slide deck, any questions that you have. So with that, we will get started. Now, a little preamble before I get right into our learning objectives and our material. So I've done many presentations on debriefing over the years, various topics of it. And one thing that this presentation grew out of, there's a couple, two things. Last fall, as I said, I do customize, or if somebody wants a workshop or some professional development, I'll do that. And I got a call from the University of New Brunswick, and they wanted me to talk about debriefing. So if you've ever taken any course from me, or perhaps I come on and do a presentation on this again, the biggest thing in my practice, everything begins with a needs assessment. So I did a little needs assessment prior to putting together that workshop. The two big questions that came up with debriefing are, how do we incorporate teaching in debriefing? Can we? Is it allowed? And secondly, difficult learners. Now, of course, there's all kinds of articles, literature is out there, and there are some great, Vince Grant and Adam Chang, a beautiful paper. I think it should be getting close to seminal status soon on a toolbox for difficult debriefing situations. And there's some others here. But it's always a little difficult to actually find some concrete steps. And the teaching part, I thought we had established that that was okay in debriefing, but somehow it seems to have gotten lost the message that yes, indeed, you can teach in debriefing. So those are the two things I focused on. So that was number one. The other thing I've noticed during COVID, I was the director of a simulation program at a hospital in Brooklyn, New York. And at the time, I was also very involved in teaching courses for the Nursing Simulation Society, for Society for Simulation Healthcare, Simulation Canada. But after that, I started getting a lot of people, and with the rise of the virtual and the way that we had to shift and pivot after COVID, and they're sending me questions. Well, my hospital, my university just spent 18 gajillion dollars on virtual headsets. Now what do I do? Do I still have to debrief? Don't they do it themselves? Can't we just all write a reflection? And isn't that debriefing? So I realized, aha, We need to go back to the basics. And as technology has increased, and as all the innovations we have now, even in an AI, I've been a firm believer in my 35-year plus nursing career. I'm a firm believer in the building blocks. I think, Lisa, you can back me up on this one. A sterile field. If you know how to maintain a sterile field, there's a lot of things you can work your way through. If you know the basic assessment, if you know your normal values and your vital signs, you can work your way. And I believe in the building blocks, and I believe in that for simulation. I fear sometimes it's gotten lost in all the hurry to teleport your learners to other universes to do something for a simulation. But this is where this is rooted from, is wanting to go back to the basics. I hope today, if we have a mix of people who are well versed in debriefing, I hope you get something new from this. If we have novices on the call, I hope this sparks your interest. And I can't stress enough, please reach out to me with any questions. And of course, a lot of the people, names that I see who are attending this, also great resources for you. But finally, just this little box that I have here, it's the name of some articles. And I was going on, if you remember the Society for Simulation in Healthcare, they publish their own journal. And I was on there looking for, I always like to update anyone knows me, I have great collections of articles. And I was up there updating it. But in the bottom corner, they always put the most popular articles, the most searched articles from their journal. I just looked at this morning, and there it is. The article on the Pearls debriefing framework from 2015. The article here, Establishing a Safe Container for Learning from 2014. And I would suggest, if you have not read this article, Establishing a Safe Container for Learning, as soon as this webinar is done, please download it and read it, or at least read it before you see students for the next time. May well be the seminal, I would argue, the seminal work in simulation. But if you go down the list further, there's a few more. More Than One Way to Debrief. It's a fantastic article comparing different debriefing frameworks from 2016. No Such Thing as Non-Judgmental Debriefing, again from Jenny Rudolph of the Safe Container and the team at the Center for Medical Simulation at Harvard from 2006. So think about that. These articles are still the most downloaded in this journal. So just a little thing to think about there. So this is why, and I was just talking to Petal before we went live here, believing in the basics, the foundations, the fundamentals of simulation. And again, that's what we need if you're going to have that effective, meaningful experience for your learners. So what is a presentation without learning objectives? Actually, full disclosure before I start this. You see a lot in debriefing. You go to, and even when I started 20 years ago, 0405, the province of Ontario funded every program of nursing in the province to implement a simulation program. First thing we were taught was debriefing is the most important thing. Debriefing is the most important. Even you still see that, you'll hear people say it. I don't believe that. I believe the entire simulation process is important. I believe that the pre-briefing, the time ahead of the scenario, I believe that scenario design, creation, and development is important. And I believe debriefing is important. But I would argue if you have not created a simulation experience, whether it's mannequin-based, whether it's virtual, whether it's a table talk, if you have not created a simulation experience that meets the needs of your learners, that is based in a needs assessment to see where there's learning gaps or where your learners are at, if you have not created learning objectives that challenge them, but yet they are able to achieve them, then you're not going to have very much to debrief. So that, again, I think it's important, but I think the entire process is important. So what we're going to look at today, just for the next hour, I want to review some evidence-based practices and criteria for debriefing. So I'm just going to give you some examples of resources you can look at to see where you're at. I always say too, we're healthcare providers or we're in the human services industries, whatever. Amar, I'm thinking of you in social work, but we have best practices we adhere to. We have the ventilator-assisted pneumonia bundles. We have sepsis bundles. We have wound care guidelines. You would never go into a patient and not know what the evidence-based best practices are. So why would we go into education and not be aware of what the established standards are? So we're going to talk about a couple of examples of those. I want to recall the Pearls debriefing framework. If you would crawl, that is the most downloaded article in the Society for Simulation Healthcare. And Pearls standing for Promoting Excellence in Reflective Learning and Simulation. Here's our Canadian content for today because it's co-authored with the great Adam Chang from Children's Hospital in Calgary, Alberta. I did that with Walter Epic. So, and I see a lot of people mention, of course, there's other frameworks. We can talk about maybe some more of those offline, but this is a big one people mentioned. And I really think once you get into it, it covers a lot of the best practices for debriefing. I want to talk about some strategies and techniques for directive teaching during debriefing, and finally, some strategies for managing emotional participants. So, off we go. And debriefing, first of all, I was fascinated. Again, big fan of a well-written journal article. If you see anything too in the debriefing literature from Walter Epic, Vince Grant, Adam Chang, Michaela Kolb, Michael Mugadurchian, or Kamal Bajaj, those are just a few of the names. And I have a stack of article here, and it's some of them, all of them. Their writing is fantastic. I love the way they word things. But this is just a newer article, and it was looking at the roles, the debriefers, and breaking it down. But they have defined debriefing, and I love just a new definition. Debriefing is defined as a facilitated conversation that explores and analyzes aspects of performance to inform future clinical practice. As a complex learning activity, debriefing involves the dynamic and flexible application of various strategies and techniques to facilitate learning. So, just giving you that definition. Also, if you want to get it, break it down even further, the classic definition of debriefing in a nutshell is a bi-directional conversation, right? Going back and forth, having that reflective conversation. Thus, another thing I believe I still have a hard time then when you'll see some literature lately talking about self-debriefing. I just had real struggle with that term because self-debriefing is like going against the whole concept of the bi-directional. So right now, I just want to go over a couple some evidence-based best practices that are out there that you can have a look at. This first one is what are called the Healthcare Simulation Standards of Best Practice. And these have been put out by INACSL, which is the International Nursing Association for Clinical Simulation and Learning. Now, I know a lot of you are not in nursing programs who tune in or are on this call. Or the problem with these standards is over the years, they have gotten hindered by the bad rap that they are simply for academic nursing. In the last two iterations of these standards from 2021 and 2025, they really work to have not only interprofessional writing teams, but also representatives from clinical settings and academic settings. So I was on the writing team for two of the pre-briefing and the design standard representing the hospital. But again, what I like about these, I'm going to show you this and another example, is they just give you something to look at to see where you're at, what you're doing, how a debriefing should look. Should any of your organizations ever want to go forward and get any kind of accreditation or any kind of acknowledgement, certification of your programs, you need to show that you're doing things according to some form of standard. So just this gives you a start at. So debriefing is plan and incorporate an appropriate manner to guide the learners in achieving the learning objectives. So even when you're starting out, you're designing your scenario, how is this going to look? And this is where it might come in. Maybe you've decided you have a real group of novices, you're going to do a micro debriefing where you go for 1 minute or to a certain point in time, you stop, you do a little debriefing, and you keep moving on. But you've planned that ahead of time. So you've planned this. What is the best way to facilitate this group afterwards and facilitate that reflective piece? Designed and facilitated by a person or technology that is capable and competent. In other words, this is just not simply a matter of, well, I was a great bedside nurse for 27 years. Surely I can debrief. I'm tenure track. Surely I can debrief. No, you want people who are competent, who have had some training and understand simulation and debriefing pedagogy. Conducted in a manner that promotes self, team, and systems analysis. And here's the big term. Again, I'm not going down this rabbit hole today. By all means, you can take week-long courses. Psychological safety. In a nutshell, we're creating an atmosphere where our learners feel safe to take that interpersonal risk. They're going to jump in and try and be the code team leader. They haven't done it before, but they've done it. They've had some experience. I'm going to try this. This is the time to try it, but they feel safe doing it. Even if they make mistakes, they're going to be discussed, they're going to reflect, they're going to get the learning from it. And finally, planned and structured on theoretical frameworks or evidence-based concepts. So I will show you a couple of examples of that. There's all kinds of theories out there. Other thing I'd like to stress too is I keep saying using the framework, using this. I am in no mean advocating for you to become robots, reading off a sheet. How did that feel for you? You get those to, I'm a big believer in cognitive aids. I always say there's a reason they laminate, used to in the day, laminate ACLS algorithms and put them on crash carts. It gives you a way to organize your thoughts. Okay, we're going to start by getting everyone's feelings, then we're going to do some analysis, and finally we'll have a summary. If this kind of thing comes up, I can ask this kind of question. I can ask this kind of question. You get to learn some styles of questioning. I believe that, especially with a novice debriefer, if you have something there, but you know these theories, you have something you're basing on, you're not simply coming into a group and letting it free for all go where it will. All right, so that's what we wanted there. And again, I read a paper years ago. Speaking of theoretical frameworks, and this paper, this is a good 10 years ago, and they were able to find 26 identified debriefing frameworks then. So I have no idea how many are out there now. But the second one I wanted to bring up is what's called the DASH. So any of you, I know a lot of people have done the various courses offered by the Center for Medical Simulation at Harvard, the gurus of all things debriefing, all the work that's come out of them, but one they created called the Debriefing Assessment for Simulation in Healthcare. There's all kinds of now versions of the tool. Students rating the debriefers rating each other, self-rating of the debriefing. However you want to look at, but and the basic in a nutshell, there's these 6 elements that it's looking at to assess for a debriefer. I consider this an evidence-based source, so you can even look at these. You may not use the tool exactly, but just have a look at these and go, yeah, do I do this? Do I set the stage for an engaging learning experience? I'm explaining what's going to happen, give them an idea of who the patient or what they're doing is. I let them know, talk a little bit about the psychological safety, let them know, I know you're here to learn, you want to do your best. I know this isn't the most real environment, but we're here together, we're going to learn, and this will work best if you treat this mannequin, this tabletop, this headset, as if it's a real patient. Maintaining that engaging context, structuring, again, going back to the first one, the debrief in an organized way, not just coming into the room with a whiteboard and drawing your plus and your delta sign and saying, okay, what'd you do well, what'd you do wrong? Structuring it, provoking the discussion. Identifying what learners did well, and I'm going to come back to this point too. In no way do I sugarcoat things. I started as an OR nurse 35 years ago. If you contaminate a sterile field, by God, I'm going to tell you I'm not interested in your feelings about it. However, I think we often get into the debriefing, get into doing this, and we spend so much time looking at everything that went wrong. What if they did something right? And I'm going to talk about this in a minute. Not in a disingenuous way, where you don't want to say anything at all, but also you can go down and look at how they came to a correct conclusion. How did they base it? I've got a slide on that in a minute. And helping learners see how to improve or sustain good performance. So if you want to go into the dash, if you just Google it, DASH debriefing, it will take you to the Center for Medical Simulations website, and you can bring up the entire tools. There's certainly a lot more to them. As well, there's a couple of other ones. There's one, a CAPES debriefing framework that comes from the Center for Pediatric and Perinatal Education. So they've developed a debriefing framework, as well as there's one called OSAD, Observed Structured Assessment of Debriefing, and it came from the Imperial College of Surgeons of London. Okay, so there's other ones out there. What I want you to take away from today is go look at an established guideline and see where your debriefing practice fits into what they're doing. Now, a couple of concepts I love. I was never a theory person. Anybody who's a nurse here, all I know from nursing school is Dorothea Orm's self-care deficit theory. I know nothing else. Never could get into theory until I started doing my master's in simulation. And then it all clicked. So there's a couple other ones that relate to debriefing, but one that is my absolute favorite, Lewis and Shine's change theory. So I want you to think this. My husband, and at the moment, at least he stockpiled it, is a bourbon aficionado. So until bourbon comes back to the LCBO. And when he has his bourbon, he has those great, giant, big ice cubes. So I want you to picture one of those big bourbon ice cubes. I take that out of the freezer and I put it in a bowl, it's going to eventually melt and it changes state. Now, if I take that water from that big ice cube, I also have an English bulldog, and I have English bulldog ice cube molds. If I take that water and pour it into the English bulldog mold, it refreezes as an English bulldog. And this is what we want to do in debriefing. Take our learners' preconceived notion, their ideas, their thoughts that maybe just aren't a little, maybe not just quite what we would want in this situation. We bring them in, we walk through it, we reflect, we have a discussion so we can change that, and then we can refreeze it in what we wanted them to learn from this scenario. So I love this visual of it. They're coming in, changing, shifting their thought patterns, really helping them get an understanding and refreezing that for them to take on into their practice. By the same token, again, they come in, they've done something well, exploring what led them to that. Can they apply that to other situations? And then refreezing. One of my favorites. Other two things, whenever I've taught a debriefing course, and these are the two things I believe that everything virtually hangs on with debriefing. Again, these come from Jenny Rudolph and the team at CMS. One is the performance gap. What we want to see happen in a scenario, what actually happens, and this gap. We're trying to close that in debriefing. Or again, something went well, we want to solidify, fill in, solidify that, make that bridge there and solidify it. But where this comes from is the concept of frames. Now, many of you may have heard it, but it always bears repeating. We're looking at the learner frames. What have they brought to this experience? My best example of frames is I had a colleague, and every time I've used this example, and there's military folks in the room, they give it the thumbs up. I had a colleague who was in the US Navy as a medic for 12 years. In the military, in a mass casualty, your priority is the walking wounded. The theory being you're getting them ready to go back out to battle. The most grievously wounded, they're just going to wait. In a civilian mass casualty, it's the opposite. Your priority is the most gravely wounded. The walking wounded can wait. My friend left the military, went into another role where she went to a mass casualty drill. What do you think she did? She was treating all the walking wounded. And when she got to the debriefing, they were, could you explain what you were doing? She's like, 12 years as a medic in the US Navy. So that is my best frames. When I worked in the hospital down in Brooklyn, we were doing a lot with our team around patient experience. And we grew and trying along and speaking everyone in our hospital how you engage with the patient provider interface. And we couldn't get our dietary aides to speak to the patients when they brought the tray. So we actually tried to pilot a little simulation with them to see. And in the debriefing, I'll never forget this, one of the pivotal moments in my simulation career, the debriefing aide looked at us and said, well, we were all sent, they were sent to the equivalent of Sodexo or one of those food conglomerates in New York City. She said, we were taught never to speak to patients. That was their frame they were bringing. They weren't doing anything. This is what they'd been taught. We were able to unpack that. We were able to unfreeze that notion of not speaking to patients. We were able to explain what they can do, what role they would have with the patient when they come in, and then refreeze that. So you're looking at the frames, what people bring with them, their experiences in all of your health professions, programs, and education. You may have already observed it in nursing. We may have students coming who were an RPN for 12 years, and then they're coming back as an undergraduate baccalaureate nurse. What is their frame they're bringing? You have medical students who may have been a paramedic or in another healthcare role before. What are they bringing? So you want to look at what their frames. How did that lead to their course of action? What was the result? With debriefing, you explore those frames right? And so you may want to change them or expand upon them. I hope that makes sense. If there's anything there that doesn't, please feel free to reach out to me, or if you want to pop a question in the chat. But when I really parse debriefing down to its core, for me, in my mind, those are the concepts that I think about. Now, I want to just do a little on the pearls framework, and it's probably one of the most, although I have to say, and I've been around a while, taught a lot. Now people will say, yes, yes, we do the pearls, but it really, all they're doing is the learner self-assessment, the classic plus delta. But the real pearls framework, though, in the beauty of it, it is gives you options in how you're going to approach your debriefing, or you can combine these depending on the learning objective and how it happened. So I'm just going to walk through this quickly. Again, you can go to the original article from Walter Epic and Adam Chang, and certainly there's been all sorts of articles. I've got a couple here now where they've taken pearls, using pearls debriefing for social justice and equity, using the pearls framework, using pearls to guide and support conversations with nursing students after a critical incident. So again, it's application now far and wide. If you're interested in any of these, again, please reach out to me. So with the pearls and overall, your reactions phase, okay? I always equate that reactions phase to, your Instant Pot when you hit the little valve on it when it's done, it goes psst. That's what I fear the reaction phase. How are your learners feeling? What their immediate thoughts? Where are they at after? And I actually I misread this for quite a few years. I thought with the reactions phase, just have everyone give one or two words. And no, actually, I got corrected on that because with the reaction phase, have them give their thoughts, what they thought of what just happened, where they're at. And it looked in the literature and said, if you can let them all have those feelings up front, it may save you some conflict later on between people. So you may be able to address some issues right in that part that will allow you to get into that analysis. So that was very interesting. Your description phase, and I think this comes situational awareness. 58-year-old male came to the ER in VTAC, whereas half of the groups, really? I thought it was AFib, Want to make sure everybody's on the way. Let's give us a synopsis of this case. So everyone is on, you've just established that situational awareness. Especially I find this more, Walter Epic and Adam Chang were both pediatric ER physicians, so I sometimes wonder if some of the cases they're looking at can be a little more complex or a lot of moving parts, so you want to establish that. But, so you have that. And then you get into that analysis. Oh, sorry, just want to back up to the pearls came from, if you ever see the GAS framework, gather, analyze, summarize, and that came out around 2012 with the American Heart Association. Again, these two gentlemen developed that, and then it morphed into this pearls framework. So in a nutshell, with these pearls, you got three different ways you can go. You can do that learner self-assessment. What went well? What could you change? And go through, and they do that self-assessment. On the other side, that focused facilitation. And those are where you get into your styles of question, like the advocacy inquiry. I noticed that you gave this medication. I'm wondering if you might have gone to another one because, or I'm thinking that. Can you tell me what was on your mind? My previous job, we had one of our PICU attendings who always would say, what was going through your mind at the moment that you chose that? You want to get inside their minds, and you're not challenging them. I think it's called an advocacy inquiry statement. It's broken down in three parts. I saw, I think, I wonder. I saw this happen. I saw you do this. I'm thinking that maybe blank. I wonder. All right. So again, I'm going through this very quickly in a nutshell, but it's actually what's called the debriefing molecule. So just trying to, what debriefing does allows you to get in your heads. You're not saying they're wrong, and it's how you word those. I saw this. In other situations, seen other people do this. I'm wondering what you were thinking. I'm wondering what led you to that decision. What other experiences have you had that made you go there? So you want to get in their heads, right? It's not enough that they can just do the right thing. Do they know why they did it? So you can use those. You may have one learning objective. You may mix those. That's an experienced debriefer when you're able to kind of mix those if need be. And then finally, in all of these, though, you're looking at people's frames, again, the frames to close the performance gap. And finally, the summary. And the summary can come in two parts. One is you reviewing what were the objectives? What did you want them to take from this? I have this later in another slide, I think, but it always bears repeating. One of my professors in my master's program, Dr. Sharon Kalman from St. Christopher's Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, what do you want them to know before they walk out the door? What is it you want? No, actually, when I was doing simulation again in my previous job, and people would come to me, they wanted some kind of simulation activity, and that was actually my first question. What do you want them to know before they walk out the door? Second one is having everyone identify what are they taking with from this experience into their practice. So I know that's a lot. I just find the Pearls framework. If you've got some experience in debriefing, you've never read this paper, you can read it. If you're a novice, it's a little bit, might be a bit of a more cumbersome read, but certainly there's lots of things out there using it. And again, that is just one framework. You may be in an organization where you have adopted another one. Okay, but this just gives you some ideas you can take into your debriefing. This is something I developed. You're welcome to take it. I actually did this for the staff in my previous hospital when I was just giving them the basics of debriefing. So I kind of combined a little pearls, a little of that gas that I modeled. So how'd that feel? Get a synopsis of the case, that reaction, analysis. Now that phase can be different frameworks, maybe called understanding as well. What worked well and why? What would you change and why? What was easy? What was challenging? You want to get inside your heads. You want to look at the frames and the performance gaps. And finally, as I just said, what do you want everyone to know before they walk out the door? And what is their take-home message? And again, coming back to this, I found this article of 2023, and I thought, well, that's true. What if they did everything right? They got it. They hit it out of the park. Wow. But what you wanted us to know what they know, but how did they know? Again, you know how often we see that where people do the right thing, but they have no idea why. It was random. It was their lucky day. I did the mastery learning course at Northwestern, and with Jeff Barsuck, who did one of the seminal studies on the residency program, doing a central line insertion training with their residents. They decreased their CLABSI rates, therefore save money for the hospital. But he always said when he did this, he would make the residents do the central line twice just to make sure they never got lucky the first time. But what you want to look at is fetilling their reaction. What cues, what pattern recognition, do they have the rules of thumb? Tell the story of how they got to that point. What other experiences they have and they brought with them. So I think that's kind of interesting to see as well, too. Have you seen this somewhere else? When has that been done? I think we spend so much. Oh, hi, Petal, go ahead.
Oh,
Just saw your hand.
I just love this slide, and I wanted to just share a thought in terms of
Yeah.
doing everything right. At our Sim Center and across different program of the postgraduate medical education programs, we're studying adaptive expertise, and the idea
Oh,
that so I love that you're saying if the learner did everything right, we could use the debrief to maybe push them a little bit harder or help them envision what happens if you understand the process, but then the patient throws you a curveball, you know? So
yeah.
um, kind of like using the debrief then, because they've shown such strength and such ability, helping them to think of how would they adapt in a new situation now that they have this under their belt, so to speak, in terms of the
You,
skills.
And
Yeah.
that's what they talk about in this paper. How do you take this and apply it in different ways, right? But we want to get in their heads, how did they get to that point? What experiences? And then again, with the groups, other people can learn from that as well. So again, I'm not being, I'm not encouraging bubble wrap or say everything's good. But I think it just seems for the longest time we were, let's look at what's wrong, what they do wrong, what was wrong, maybe about what they did right or not necessarily wrong, but why was this challenging? I'm going to talk a little more about that in a bit too. So, directive teaching. And again, I'm coming back to this paper that I looked at, guiding, intermediating, facilitating, and teaching a conceptual framework for simulation educator roles in debriefing. Again, we've got Walter Epic, Vince Grant, Adam Chang, some other authors on this paper. But I really like this, and they talk about what the purpose of this study they did was looking at the different roles that get taken on within a debriefing. And they really talk about how the teaching role just gets so downplayed in the literature. They even look at different frameworks, and very often people don't mention the teaching role. So, a couple quotes here from the teaching role in simulation debriefing has often been discouraged in favor of approaches that encourage learner reflection and problem solving. In doing so, this important aspect of debriefers' practice has variably been unacknowledged, underemphasized, or ostracized. Certainly, debriefers have valuable experience and insights to share, and there are situations when a more directive approach may be warranted. For example, when there are mistakes, misconceptions, biases, or major knowledge gaps that have potential to result in harm. So, when I started in 20 years ago, it was very much debriefing. It's reflective debriefing or feedback and teaching, but never the two shall meet. But now you have permission to teach if need be. And I have that written in there. I was at the Pediatric Simulation Conference, was in Toronto. It was in 2019, and I think it's coming back. I saw. I'd have to double check, but I thought I saw that. And I went to a workshop on debriefing, and it was led by Adam Chang. And so he had a group, and they were acting. We watched this scenario, and it was a code blue or cardiac arrest, what have you. It was so badly done. It was just everything was wrong. So he said to us as the group, okay, what would your first question be? So we're all trying to, come up with an advocacy inquiry question. I noticed you didn't turn the oxygen on or check the bag. I'm wondering. And everybody's trying to come up with some very clever question. And he said, do not hide behind advocacy inquiry. You have permission to teach. Now, that was an exaggerated example, but if your learners are struggling, it's a safety concern. It's clear knowledge gap. It is okay to say, oh, think for a few minutes. Maybe we should review this. Again, my PICU attendings down in my hospital in Brooklyn were incredible debriefers. And one of them would say, I think before we start, we just need to back up a little and review this. And you have permission to do. You're not doing your learners any kind of a service if you send them out thinking they did everything great when in fact, or you're very, what happens I find more often if you're trying to not give the constructive feedback, or you don't want to teach or tell them they were wrong, it just becomes disingenuous, right? So you have permission to teach. You're imparting your knowledge. You can share your own perspective. Share knowledge and rationale behind that. I know when I was a student, I still appreciate what is the rationale? Why did we do that? That's how I was able to make the meaning and get something back in my long-term memory. And finally, show how, demonstrate. Teaching role involved in what they found from the study, addressing the performance gap to achieve meaningful and tangible learning. But one thing, this is another term you'll see in simulation quite a bit now, constructive alignment. So does the scenario fit with the modality using and meet the needs of your learners? I always say the classic in nursing education, it's September across globally, I think. Let's take all our first year nursing students and throw them into a mega code on the second day of nursing school just to see what will happen. What do you think happens? Nothing. Nothing. They end up hating simulation. Let's create this global disaster, as one of my friends says, with earthquakes and dinosaurs and everything happening, when really all you were trying to do was to get your students, get your learners how to know, which type of oxygenation method they should use. Right? So making sure it was right for them, the scenario. I remember years and years ago, and I was working in an undergraduate nursing program, not here at Bloomberg. And it was first year, second semester. The students had only been in clinical maybe 3 weeks, and that's being generous. And their instructor came up with a scenario on diabetic ketoacidosis. And at that moment in time, those students couldn't pick an insulin syringe out of a pencil case. Those students should have been teaching clients how to count complex carbohydrates and don't go barefoot on the beach in Florida. It was so far above them. Nobody got anything out of it. And that's where I'm saying, if you haven't created that scenario, that meets their needs, that constructive alignment, you really don't have very much to go on for a debriefing, or your debrief just becomes a complete, not that there's anything wrong with didactic, as this paper will say, but it just becomes a complete other lecture on diabetic ketoacidosis when they still haven't covered the pancreas in their physiology class. So you have permission to do this if you need to do it. The balance comes in where you aren't spending the entire time. But here's another thing. If you find you're doing your scenarios and you're having to spend an awful lot of time, a lot of time, teaching and reteaching and doing basic information, then maybe you need to go back and do another needs assessment of who your learners are. Maybe you have to go back to your curriculum committee and say, are we covering this? Because the students are coming and they just don't seem to have this. So it sort of opens up bigger issues. So I hope that answers a little bit. Again, this is a lovely paper and how they've structured it. They talk about the teaching role, the facilitating role. What are the key things you should be doing? So again, it's on my reference list, Ordon, Epic and all, or you can reach out to me as well. Difficult emotional learners, and that's what a lot of people struggle with. I mentioned, I don't have it in my reference list, but there is a wonderful paper, Difficult Debriefing Toolbox. Again, Vince Grant, who's also from the Children's Hospital in Calgary, and Adam Chang. But also another one I just came across. I'm a big fan of papers, and especially when they give you sample scripts and sample to say, and this is a great one, Managing Psychological Safety and Debriefings, a dynamic balancing act. But it talks about, really gives you strategies for when your learners should feel they are. But a few of the key things that came out, psychological safety through all phases, that they're not doing the surprises, bringing in a lab value, having the scenario go off course just to see what would happen, making it so overwhelming for them. Again, I am never advocating sugarcoat or not doing it, but you have to meet the learners where they are. You want just that sweet spot where they're just stressed enough. I've been doing this 20 years. I know this material, but I'm still stressed with you all today because I know you're coming from some fantastic simulation programs and backgrounds, and I really want to bring an A game to you. You need to have that level of stress. But you don't want to be so overwhelmed that you can't perform. So you're maintaining that safety of let your learners know. By and large, I think what we're talking about here too is for formative purposes. This is not necessarily OSCEs and assessments or high stakes where they need to perform or they're not going to pass or get a certification or move on in their programs. But I'm talking about they feel like, okay, I might not know all of it, but I can give it a try and we're going to go walk through it afterwards so we can learn. Normalizing poor performance by helping learners understand why what they're doing is challenging. Yes, your first code can be very difficult. There's a lot going on, a lot of people, a lot of moving parts, a lot to be aware of. That is okay. You did not get that the first time out. As I used to say when I did nursing orientation, right? Nobody was born. I don't care what your senior resident or the charge nurse or anyone else says, no one was born knowing how to do these things. It takes a while to get to that point, right? So that's okay. If they really struggled with it, and then you stress, this is the time to do it. This is why we do this, so you can struggle here. We can talk about it. We can walk through it. You can make the meaning and take it forward in your practice. Name, validate, provide options, as she said. That's if you're feeling, and again, this is where she comes through. This is Michaela Kolbe, and she writes just some fantastic papers. And she talks about here, you're seeming angry with it. It's frustrating when you can't do with the patient what you want, or you feel blocked, you're frustrated, or you feel overwhelmed, you're very upset. We're going to walk through it. It's normal to feel upset, but nobody expects you to know this right on the first time you ever attempt this. So just giving that to them, not with this expectation, well, we just lectured that, or you saw this last night in the ER. Why can't you do it today? So giving that to them. Saw this question, I like that. And this was about another paper looking at using some aspects of debriefing when you have learners in traumatic situations. What's the most important thing you learned about your own emotional needs through this experience? How will you apply that in practice? I thought that was a very interesting one too. And offer emotional support. We're here afterwards if you want to speak about it. One of the things you see a lot is people you do a scenario, let's say the classic example, and I don't mean to be, I'm not being flippant, just saying it, perinatal loss, if you have a learner who's experienced that. Age group of some of our undergraduate learners, so you have an elderly person and there's death is going to be involved in your scenario, and they just had a grandparent pass away. Other things to be aware of. But I think what we're looking at here is you want to set up, a lot of these could be, I'm not saying all the time, but difficult learners or all a lot of teaching moments or frustration. Looking at who your learners are, what they need, creating that meaningful experience with objectives that are relevant to them that they should be able to achieve. It may be a little difficult. You may need to help them do some cueing, do some prompting along the way, but you can sort of hopefully alleviate some of this. Now, you may get into some things, and I really like the way they stated here in a debriefing, and you've got two people of two very different, I think we should have done this, I think we should have done this, and it ends up in a debate. But that is a great one if you're a skilled debriefing. Okay, we have two different schools of thought going here. Let's walk through each one. What a great learning experience for everyone in that group. I think if you can get everybody to look at, here's also, I'm going to tie this right back to what I started with in the beginning, looking at everyone's frames. You're doing a scenario, and this is with your residents, but one of your residents happened to have been in the Canadian military as a medic for 8 years and now is here, and another one of your residents who's a little bit younger. They've got two very different styles, what they think should have happened. Let's have everybody try and look at each other's frames, look at each other's rationales, which personally I think would help in a lot in the world in general. But looking at that, and she said here, okay, but what a great learning opportunity, I think, to actually have two people and walking through it. So it's okay to have these emotions. It's okay to have these reactions happen, but how you as the facilitator can help. But I'm also stating, I think some things you may be able to, as they say, head off at the pass with the proper pre-briefing, with the proper planning, the proper scenario design. And finally, just if debriefing is not necessarily instinctive. You may be a wonderful teacher, you may be a wonderful clinician, but debriefing is a skill set unto its own. And some great papers too, now looking at the cognitive load for debriefers, how many things you're having to manage in your head at the same time. Experience in knowing how to blend those three different styles that are outlined in the Pearls framework. I like this one. Everybody says I'm learner centered, but what's the easiest thing in the world to do? Flip into a lecture, right? If things, I'll just lecture, let's just talk on this. It easily can become instructor centered. Higher level debriefing skills, presentation, handling these situations. Again, it's like anything. You didn't all jump right in. As a nursing student, I didn't go do a central line dressing before I just knew how to assess a peripheral IV line. All right. You're moving up scaffolding. So it's a skill set that you've got to work on and hone and get into more intense situation. And ongoing assessment of competence. So whether you go back and you get that DASH tool, that CAPE tool, that OSAD tool, you write down some best practices as in a group, maybe you do an informal evaluation of each other. So there are my references, and I stop share. And there we go. I know that was a lot of information. Anybody who knows me knows that's how I tend to present. Anything, well, I will put my email back in the chat so you can reach out. But right now, a little time for questions if anyone has any or comments.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm going to manage the chat for you if the
Okay.
discussion gets exciting.
Oh,
Maybe I can start the discussion off as people warm up. You spoke a lot about debriefing, and we know that there are many different debrief models that are out there. You highlighted Pearls, which my sim center uses across the board. We all love Pearls, and then there's the GAS framework as well. Is there ever a time when you might switch from the Pearls and use a different debriefing method in your experience?
One that I really like is rapid cycle deliberate practice. Now, in the last couple of years, I've seen it more mentioned as a facilitation style, but originally was a debriefing. Again, it was done with pediatric ER physicians. So what that does, and I was going to do a little more talk on it. So you're starting with the scenario. So you either say 1 minute in, we're going to stop and regroup. Or maybe you have a number of actions you want to see, for example, an ACLS. It works very good with novices or something algorithmic. So you would stop at this moment in time. Okay, where are we at right now? What are you thinking? What are you thinking you would like to be giving right now or do next? Where would we go? What else could we be thinking about? And then you can go on to the next one, or you could go to that point, replay what just happened, and then add on. There's a great schematic diagram, and I could not find it this morning, where it shows you starting one, patients complaining a little bit, you begin to bag them. The next step, bagging them, and then analyzing the heart rhythm. Next step, code team arrives. Next step, or compressions. Next step, you're adding on with each step. So there's ones like that, okay? There's ones where you're doing in situ, in scenario debriefing. I did the course, the mastery learning course at I said at Northwestern, and when we did our rapid cycle, they actually stopped and they like physically moved us. It was a code blue into the position of where we should be for the most effective performance. Like physically, no, turn your shoulders this way, kind of thing. So yeah, whatever you're using, and I think those are the two most common. There's some very specific. There's one for in nursing education programs, debriefing for meaningful learning. There's a few. If you go back to that paper I mentioned, more than one way to debrief. It was from 2016. It was Taylor Sawyer and a group, and there's some different ones. But you know what? When they all come down to it, some of them have three or five or seven different. They all basically do come down to the same three buckets of reactions or gathering, analysis or understanding, and summary.
Amar has a question for you.
Oh,
Hey Elizabeth, thanks very
mm,
much for that presentation. I really appreciate the emphasis on debriefing, and I'm also a new kind of teaching stream
yeah.
prof at U of T, and for me, I'm really interested in making the most out of the 3 hour lecture, right? And
Mhm.
time management is always something I'm kind of considering. Our simulations are, each student gets 10 minutes to work with an actor to
Oh,
demonstrate
okay.
course-related skills. And so, a student will go up, they'll have 10 minutes to do an assessment or apply an intervention, and then they'll have like some time for feedback from observing students. And then the next student will go up. So it takes about an hour and a half of lecture time. And I'm wondering, like, part of me wants to spend a bit of time like processing feelings, like getting into what
Mhm.
went well, what didn't go well, hearing from every person that presented, hearing from people who observed, processing feelings as well as like, what they would do with the client after the session.
Mhm.
Um, but then also part of me wants to get into additional lecture material, right? And because like there's so much to cover in such a short period of time. How much time do you usually give to the debrief after the simulation's done?
Well, generally, as a rule of thumb, usually your debrief, they used to say kind of twice as long as your simulation, but again, that can work. I think one of the keys that I see is know when whether your simulation, whether your learners have met the objectives or they're just really struggling at some point, and you say, okay, time. And then you kind of have to reframe your debriefing a bit. You want to spend a little longer in the debriefing than the scenario. Years ago, I had a group come to me at my old job's pharmacy. Well, we have a 40-minute scenario and we'll have 10 minutes for debrief. I said, how about we flip that around? So you would like to add a little more, see what the point is, but then that's creating your scenario design, right? How long does it take to meet the things that you want them to do in this? Maybe it ends up maybe breaking that up a little bit, but at least I'm going to say I know time's difficult for everyone now, at least equal time. But I also think too, I've seen that a bit, knowing when you let a scenario run its course. Have they met it? Does it look like it's going? If everybody's just really struggling and floundering, having them stand there for 10 more minutes is not accomplishing anything. You can go through the debrief. Maybe you have time to do it again. Maybe you don't. So it's hard to say. Again, we're all working in the time constraints, right? So does that, but usually you should allow more time for your debriefing than your scenario and really look at your scenarios because the tendency is to want to throw lots and lots of things in them. Really come back to what you really want to accomplish with that.
Sense. All right. Thanks very much, Elizabeth.
Last question goes to Lisa.
Oh my, well, thank you, Elizabeth, for a wonderful, informative discussion. I know I'm towards the end of my career here, but have been in the system for quite a long time.
Mhm.
And I've realized that debriefing, you're absolutely right. Double the time is required, I think, to be able to get the students very engaged in what they've learned. However, one area that I find that supports debriefing that seems to be not emphasized enough is the pre-briefing. Knowing
Oh,
the limitations of your simulators, your
yeah.
scenario, because if you do not pre-brief enough, then your whole day is shot.
I have my pre-briefing slides here because I thought, but no, I'm a big believer in that, and that I didn't think I stress that you can alleviate a lot if they know what's happening, what's our objectives. This is for formative purposes. We're going to have a debriefing afterwards. This is how this works. I mean, I got to think everyone on this call has watched a scenario where the learners are frantically going through the crash cart drawers, opening and closing and slamming them because they can't find something that you put on a shelf, but nobody told them. So yes, you are exactly right, but I had to make some cuts here today and
Oh yeah.
pre-briefing. Certainly something we could come back and discuss at another time. If any in the hospital settings, I have a beautiful example, a hospital in Queens, New York, that did a entire protocol on training their staff for acute stroke care and had the letter of pre-brief they sent out to everyone in the hospital. This is why we do simulation. This is what will happen instead of just throwing up an insight to and no one knows what's happening. I'll
Absolutely.
put,
You know,
but you, and sorry, you excited me there so much because I'm like, I know I had to cut those
the element of
slides.
surprise is fantastic, but the disaster of not knowing is worse.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, I want to formally thank you with 1 minute to the hour for this
Yeah.
wonderful presentation. You've really inspired all of us to think about the basics of what we do every day and to figure out how we can enhance
Oh,
this
I
work. You mentioned Jenny Rudolph a lot, so I can't miss the opportunity to let everyone know
I know.
that we are having the amazing Jenny Rudolph presenting in March. So mark your calendars for March 26th. Next month, February 19th, myself and Samantha Lombardo will be presenting. We're joining forces with the Rehab Hospital, Providence Healthcare, which is part of Unity Health. We're going to talk about using VR Sim in a rehab hospital to teach suicide risk. And then in March, we've got Jenny Rudolph from Harvard coming to share with us her topic. Ooh, why is it not sharing her flyer? Are you seeing the other flyer?
I saw it there. She's amazing. I was at a conference once and I just washed my hands and I hadn't even really dried them and I got so excited to see her. Like I fangirled her in the washroom
Yes,
with wet hands. She's amazing. So
yes, she
yes, I
is.
can't believe it's only
So
going to be an hour. That's
I
sad. We
know,
gotta.
I know. We'll have to make time for discussion, but her topic will be from conflict to
Mhm.
collaboration, cultivating high trust duos at point of care. So join us in February and March. We
Yeah.
look forward to seeing all of you there. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.